Hi, I'm Pat Harrison from Ocean Waves Quilting, and what I'd like to share with you today is my method of preparing fabric for binding. I have a number of long arm customers who bring their quilts to me to be quilted and then also to be bound. So this is for them to know how to prepare the binding to bring to me, but it's also for anyone else out there who is interested in how we prepare binding fabric to make the perfect binding. So listen along, and I hope this helps you in your quest for the perfect binding. Thank you. Binding is a wonderful way to finish a quilt's edge. It provides stability, longevity, and often a pop of color or some graphic imagery. There are two types of binding that I offer to my own customers. The one on the left is completely machine done front and back, and the one on the right is machine done on the front and then brought to the back for hand sewing. Both of these are wonderful choices, and what I'll be showing you in a moment is how to work your way through the steps of preparing binding for application. One thing I like to do to my fabric before starting to sew with it is to wash it in the hottest water possible with a light detergent, something like a Woolite. Then I hang it to dry. When it's dry, it goes away into my stash. If I'm going to use it right away, I then want to make it firmer, easier to work with, and to do that, I use starch. The analogy I use is, would I rather quilt with a piece of tissue, or would I rather quilt with a piece of copy paper? My response is, I would rather quilt with a piece of copy paper. So this is what I do to get that soft fabric into copy paper readiness. When we have our fabric chosen and washed and ready to roll, we do need to consider the grain of the fabric that we're going to be using on our binding. There are two grains in a fabric. There's your lengthwise grain, which is parallel to the selvage, the crosswise grain, which is perpendicular to the selvage, and then we have the bias grain, which is created by the intersection of those two. The lengthwise grain is stronger. Those are the threads that go around the loom, and they're very, very long threads. The crosswise grain is softer, and what we're looking for is a softer grain. Now, let's make believe that we have purchased fabric. We cut off the selvage for who knows what reason, and now we don't know what is what. So there is something called the snap test that we can do to find out what is the stronger and what is the weaker grain on our fabric. So listen along. There's one. There's the other. So I'm sure you could tell that one of them is weaker, and it is this going in this direction. So that will be the way I will cut the strips for this binding. Once I figure out how many binding strips I need to go around that quilt, that is the amount of fabric I will then starch. I don't starch everything. There is a situation where some insects like to eat starch because keep in mind that it is simply cornstarch and water. So I don't want to have a lot of fabric in my stash with cornstarch on it. For those of you who have problems with insects getting into starched fabric, I'd recommend lavender scented or lavender added starch or tea tree oil added to starch. Either one works well. I do use heavy duty starch. I use a spray can. You can also use liquid starch at a 50% concentration or the synthetic starches that are out there. Any of those products will do the same thing, which is stiffening up your fabric. So I simply start spraying on the wrong side. And if this were a lot of fabric, I would probably be doing it on the floor of my studio. I have put down a plastic drop cloth, one of our famous design wall tablecloths. And then I will simply just start rolling it up, crumbling it up, remembering we're starching on the wrong side. And once that is done, Leave that to hang overnight or for a few hours near a fan to dry. When it is dry, then you can steam iron it from the right side. If you're in a hurry, you can go ahead and iron from the right side. I usually recommend folding it in half with the starched wrong sides inside and then iron from the right side. This will work better than going directly onto the starch side, but if you do get your iron coated with starch, you can use a magic eraser, wet magic eraser with a warm iron setting, and that starch will come right off. Once my fabric is starched and ready, and I've determined how many strips I need, I'm ready to cut. I also need to determine if this is going to be a 2-inch binding, which would be a machine sewn and then hand finished, or if this is going to be a completely machine sewn and finished binding, which would be 2 1/4. I'm going to go with a 2-inch, and I'm going to make sure that my edges at the top are even, and then align my ruler at the bottom. I'm not using the lines of the mat, I'm using the rulers for more accuracy. My first cut is going to be a clean cut. My second cut is going to be a 2-inch in, which will give me that ready to be machine sewn on the front and hand finished on the back. Always good to remember to close that rotary cutter after each use. It's a good habit to get into. And now we're ready to sew 2 of the strips together, and I'll demonstrate that for you. I like to lay out my strips when I'm joining them. And there are people who will go with it and just wing it and hope that their strips are going to be perpendicular at this point and straight when sewn. Or there are those of us who believe in marking. I'm a marker often, so I'm going to simply mark right across the stitching line with a pencil, which didn't show up too well, did it? Make it dark enough that you can see it. And there it is. So now we're ready to go to the machine to get that sewn. And now we're ready to sew. I'm sewing on a 1960 something featherweight, Singer featherweight, which my husband sells, repairs, and restores. And it's a sweet sounding little machine. One thought is if you are hesitant to change your thread color, you can always increase your stitch length. On a modern machine, I would probably put it on a 1.5. On a Singer featherweight or similar, I would put it on an 18 to 20 stitches per inch. The fineness of the stitches will basically melt into the fabric, and unless you had seriously high contrast, you'll have basically an invisible seam. But do test if you decide to get too high contrast. Once our seam is complete, or our binding join is complete, we're going to trim off the threads. Trim the seam down to 1/4 inch and about 1/4 inch. And then we're going to nestle the seam stitches. That'll help flatten them. It's also called setting the seam. And then we're going to press the seam open. Once that is done, we're going to get back to a little more starching, and this is to get the strip in half. So I'm going to put a bead of starch right down the middle, and I'm simply going to fold the binding wrong sides together as accurately as I can and follow along with my iron. Many people actually make their bindings oversized, so they might make something like a 2-inch at 2.5. They'll get it completely put together and then they will trim it to perfection. So depending on your level of perfection, you can simply fold it in half, have that little bit of starch in there, and you can see that it's become a much more stable, a much firmer binding. I find that I don't even use a walking foot when I'm applying my binding. Between the stability of the quilt and the stability of the binding, everything goes together smoothly. Once this step is finished, I like to ask my customers to put their binding on a cardboard or on a pull noodle to transport it to me. So all completely ready to go and on a piece of cardboard and ready to come to me for application to their quilt. I hope you've enjoyed watching. I hope you've learned a few tips, and I hope you have always perfect bindings. Thank you for watching.